Chris O'Connor here. Join the Curmudgeon Rock Report's invite-only curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist that pays honor to this episode.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. It crawled out of Seattle. This corrosive-sounding, sludgy, menacing beast grew organically from the music scene of a supposedly major city that was otherwise on the outside of the standard U.S. touring circuit. Without meaning to, on a macro level, this beast challenged the record industry's at-the-time hierarchy and perception of what rock music, or better yet, good rock music, could be. On a micro level, it eviscerated the commercial viability of the horrendous pop metal and glam metal that dominated mainstream rock radio and MTV at the time. That style of rock was forever stained and branded as a tacky, tawdry relic of a mostly tacky, tawdry era of music in general for every generation of music fans to follow. But on a more important level, this beast took over the world and became the dominant and most popular style of American rock for the rest of the decade. This beast also transcended music and had a profound influence on pop culture, TV, film, fashion, and even social politics were all impacted by this beast. Of course, we're talking about grunge. It was the last major revolutionary movement in rock music that affected the mainstream before rock in general became reduced to a niche genre a la jazz a decade later. And considering these fascist-friendly times that the U.S. is living in, it's important to remind people of what a righteous, noble revolution looks like and sounds like. This is going to be the first of a 10-part series, not to be published consecutively, there'll be other standalone episodes published in between, that covers the evolution of grunge, how it started, how it conquered and influenced the world, and most importantly, all the major bands/artists and albums of a period spanning a little more than a decade. And it isn't just grunge bands from Seattle that we're going to cover. We're also going to include bands from different parts of the U.S. who weren't exactly grunge, but were grunge-adjacent, meaning they shared a sensibility with grunge in how they were part of or influenced the overall indie/alternative explosion of the 1990s. We're talking about Bikini Kill from Olympia, Washington, Stone Temple Pilots from San Diego, early Smashing Pumpkins and the Jesus Lizard from Chicago, Soul Asylum and Babes in Toyland from Minneapolis, Sonic Youth from New York, Throwing Muses and Belly from Rhode Island, Dinosaur Jr. and Sebadoh from Massachusetts, and of course, the Pixies from the Massachusetts capital of Boston. So put on that raggedy flannel shirt, throw on those ripped jeans, and scour your closet for those old Doc Martens boots as we embark on this epic, very personal 10-part saga of good rock music's last stand as a commercial force. I say personal because this is the rock music that touched the lives of yours truly curmudgeons, both of us being tried and true Gen Xers. Welcome to part 1 of the saga of grunge, and welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report.
Hey, welcome everybody. Want to start this episode by pointing out that we, the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and your fellow curmudgeons, we have now officially been in existence for longer than 5 years.
Damn.
Which in podcasting is an eternity. The weird part is not a whole lot has changed in podcasting tech in 5 years. Descript is blown up. We actually just got a subscription to Descript, and so we're now into AI editing. But other than that, it's like it's the same shit. It's basically get a good USB podcast mic, and I mean, confession, we used to use Zencaster when it was still buggy, and we use Zoom these days. And we spend about $400 a year on this podcast, and so you too can have a podcast. We've been around for a while, and we've covered a lot of ground. And now we're doing a remix of some stuff that we've covered in the past, and we are focusing on grunge astutely. Right, Arturo?
The history and the long saga of it. It's Shakespearean in its epic proportions. It's got happiness. It has redemption. There's tragedy. There's sadness. There's death. There's life. There's everything in the story of grunge.
Yeah, and it starts at the beginning, which is what we're focusing on today. Back when not a whole lot of people realized that there was something actually happening in the water. And then they started to kind of figure it out by 87. But so it's kind of a fascinating thing to talk about and look about and revisit a lot of these albums and these artists. So with that, before we do that, we get to cross over into the other side of the space-time continuum and enter our favorite parallel universe. It's an interesting place. Rock and roll never went the way of jazz. It's still dominant over there. And this edition of the Parallel Universe, where we cover new and newish artists, we're doing a couple of neat things. One, we're revisiting probably the last great year for rock albums, and we're also probably saying goodbye to a guy who may be the prince of the Parallel Universe right now, and probably this time next year won't belong to the Parallel Universe anymore.
Yeah.
He'll be a favorite of the real universe. So this should be interesting. So let's get started. Art, who are you covering in this edition of the Parallel Universe?
Yes. 3 years ago, we covered the most recent album by the Brooklyn, New York band The Men. If I recall, we both gave it a very positive review.
Yep.
In fact, this is a band that I've been very enthusiastic about for over a decade. An eclectic band that covers such a range of styles in the rock spectrum, and doing so with such consistently good songwriting, you could say The Men are, to this day, still New York City's best kept secret. So I'm cracking open the vault in our parallel universe, meaning this album would have been a huge hit in a parallel universe where rock music was still pop culturally relevant and where people have good taste, and announcing to the world the brilliance of the Men's greatest album and overall one of the greatest albums of the 2010s. I'm talking about their 2013 magnum opus, New Moon. Before this album, their general sound could be described as post-punk noise with the speed and aggression of hardcore punk and a whiff of metal heaviness. In other words, they were idols before idols and much better at doing that kind of thing, if you ask me. New Moon brought about a dramatic shift in the band's approach, though. All of a sudden, they were interested in conventional melodies and subtle pop hooks, and they began incorporating 1970s and 80s American roots rock into their blistering sound. Their trademark intensity was still prevalent, but it was smoothed over with a newfound love of classic songcraft. You can hear strong echoes of Tom Petty, The Replacements, and even early REM. While opens the record with a beautiful slice of Kinks-ish piano pop, Half Angel, Half Light blasts off into jangly power pop heaven as if Tom Petty and Big Star's Alex Chilton finally had a child together. Without a Face rocks with a riveting sense of tension and release reminiscent of the great Portland, Oregon indie punk band The Wipers, while The Seeds brings Paul Westerberg-esque, he of The Replacements, ragged, beer-soaked barroom rock. Of course, when you're venturing to this kind of music, the specter of Neil Young and Crazy Horse's grunginess always looms large and does so on the exquisite I Saw Her Face, while High and Lonesome is a gorgeous twangy instrumental that would not have been out of place on a mid-80s REM record. The brass and electric rock holy balls like vintage Pearl Jam, while Birdsong is sublime country rock, sounding very much like a heavier version of the Byrds, hence the title. The album ends with sweet rock and roll bliss. Freaky is basically Reckoning-era REM on steroids, and the epic album closer Supermoon is a riff monster bash out that doesn't let up. I simply love this record with all my heart. It's a 5-star classic that very nearly made my personal list of the 100 greatest albums of all time. Chris?
Yeah, this really is a fabulous record. It's eclectic as hell, and it's really a tale of two albums here. So the first half, and a lot of the touch points that you mentioned, I agree with, but there's a few others. The first half of the album is a combo of like mid-70s Kinks and the Smithereens. I mean, seriously, the Seeds is very, very Smithereens. Smithereens is one of my favorite bands, going back.
Well, the Smithereens were very influenced by the Replacements, so there you go.
Well, yeah, there you go. Okay, so there you go. But in terms of the way they smoothed it over, what the Replacements did was a little bit more jagged, but the Smithereens were smoother, and so it has that kind of smooth power popness to it. And then you get that transitional song, you mentioned it, that country tinged instrumental, High and Lonesome. But then after that, it goes into full-blown propulsion mode. I mean, the rest of the album is just fucking awesome. It just one banger after another. And so you have Tom Petty and Neil Young on the one hand, and then you've got like Dino Jr., the Replacements, and X. Let's say, the brass and electric are very X-ish. And then the album ends with what amounts to a 8-minute long Crazy Horse jam.
Yeah.
I mean, really is. It's kind of their take on that. So yeah, so really fabulous stuff. I think my favorite songs on the record are probably the brass, electric, and Birdsong. Birdsong is really cool. I mean, that's good. It sounds like the Birds, but it also sounds like Tom Petty. It's like amped up Petty.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. And so while we're back here, and I'm glad you went back to 2013, it dawned on me that probably was the last great year for rock albums. I mean, here's a roll call. Kurt Weill, Death Heaven, Vampire Weekend, Parquet Courts, Daft Punk, that counts as a rock record. Savages, and their debut. Waxahachie's Cerulean Salt. Bombino, which is a very underrated record. That's West African dude and Dan Auerbach jamming out. Jason Isbell's Southeastern. Ty Segall, and the Arctic Monkeys. And right. so
yeah, Slayford Maud's debut album came out that year. Fuzz, which is Ty Segall's heavy metal side project, also came out that year, and a very good David Bowie album the next day. Yep. The OCs came out with their first great album, Floating Coffin, that year.
Yeah, and actually over the years, the Queen of the Stone Age album, which I used to hate, has grown on me.
I still don't like it.
from that year, where they did a combination of like Bowie and NIN. Very, very weird record, but actually some really cool stuff on that. So there you go. I mean, you've got a year in the 2010s that probably produced at least half of the 10 best rock records of the decade. At least half. I mean, Sunbather is definitely on there.
Death Heaven, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Vampire Weekend's Modern Vampires of the City is definitely on there.
Yeah, that's easily their best album.
Yeah, I would put honestly, I would put the Daft Punk record on there, and I would also put the Waxahachie record, Cerulean Salt, on there. Among if you're gonna for top 10. So just an awesomely rich year for rock and roll, and you haven't had a year like that since. You've only, at most you've had like 2 or 3 great rock records every year since. Not a whole lot of depth. Maybe you disagree with that, but there's just hasn't been a lot that's really captured. 2018 comes closest. 2018 had some great records. Wolf Alice and Kurt Weill and Amyl and the Sniffers, and I think Infest the Rat's Nest is 2018, right? Or is that 2019?
No, that's 2019, and so is Amyl and the Sniffers. That's also 2019.
Oh, I thought that was 2018. Okay.
No, I got you. Their full-length debut is 2019.
Okay, well, there we go then. So, yeah, really phenomenal stuff. So now let's get a little closer to the here and now. We said that the men hailed from Brooklyn. Well, let's now talk about the modern prince of Brooklyn in the parallel universe. We're talking about the solo debut from very late in 2024. This is from Cameron Winter and the album Heavy Metal, which is a fascinating record, not quite 4 stars, but fascinating and worth investigating, and will probably grow in stature over the coming years. So let's talk about this record. And yes, by the way, this continues a recent theme of this podcast that Chris really loves geese. And so let's talk about Cameron Winter's heavy metal. So now towards the end of Geese's remarkable 2023 album, 3D Country, vocalist and primary songwriter Cameron Winter sings, "Some sad songs have no fucking point." Listen to Winter's solo debut record from very late 2024, Heavy Metal, may spark that same reaction in some people out there upon first listen. But indeed, there is a point to heavy metal, a ridiculously self-assured and oddly poignant effort from Winter, who was just 21 and segueing into 22 years old over the course of making the album. How to describe heavy metal? Well, it's definitely a quest by Winter to find a singular voice as a singer-songwriter rather than as a member of a four-person collective. And it's also a workshop for Winter's actual voice, which naturally is baritone, but in his creative restlessness, Winter takes to cartoonish falsettos and old Al Jolson-like cackles. It's really something to behold. Otherwise, Winter takes some strange and occasionally breathtaking risks here, and what he fashions can be described as a bastard child of Leonard Cohen, Tom Waits, Carole King, and Nick Cave at his grandest and most dramatic. And he throws in sprinkles of Van Morrison, Nick Drake, Tim Buckley, and Rufus Wainwright for good measure. As that swath of varied influences suggests, Winter here oscillates between earnest and pointed on the one end and awesomely weird and impressionistic on the other. For instance, he evokes early 70s soft rock icons on the soulful electric piano-driven swinger, and really a banger, Nausicaa, Love Will Be Revealed. And yes, that is a reference to the unrequited love interest of Odysseus in Homer's The Odyssey. And he also does the richly rendered pop nugget Love Takes Miles, as he goes full-throated gospel, and he also goes full-throated gospel-inflected folky on the pretty pump organ splash ballad Try As I May. That's Winter playing things relatively straight. But then he gets magnificently strange and at times incredibly moving on the album's best songs. On soothing, wide-eyed album opener The Rolling Stones, he sings of leading a conga line 1,000 chickens long and slips in dark jokes about the drowning of Rolling Stones guitarist Brian Jones and the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. On the amazing Waltz Time Cancer of the Skull, my favorite song on the album, he paints absurd pictures that speak of salesmen's teeth and bullets flying through bulletproof glass, beatings with ukuleles, and cancer of the fingers belonging to beginners, and how those songs are meant for bad singers. All while his backing musicians fill the arrangements with woodwinds and horn beyond piano and acoustic guitar. Logically, it doesn't make much sense, but it sure does bolster the rich texture and nearly hypnotic nature of the music. Same deal, but much more jaw-dropping with the single from this album, $0, $, and then numeral zero, $0. Ostensibly, it's a lovely piano number about a relationship slipping away from Winter, but he makes a few creative choices that turn this thing into true art. He starts out with what seems like an amusing a cappella warble that sounds like he's doing an impression of either Tarzan or Barney from The Simpsons. During the first verse, which initially finds him holding hands in the water with his girl, he suddenly bursts into the observation, "Fuck these people. Fuck these people, I'm not here." Then after the song builds to a gorgeous crescendo, he spins out into an alarming epiphany. Quote, God is real, I'm not kidding this time, I think God is actually real, God is real, God is actually real, God is real, I wouldn't joke about this, I'm not kidding this time. End quote. So taken as a whole, the song is an actually impressionistic depiction of a panic attack turned into a revelation. We're talking impressionism as in the 17th century shit. This really just floors me as I relate to it in a personal way, as I pretty much came to the same frantic conclusion 8 years ago. Heavy Metal isn't a perfect album by any means. Winter gets a little too cute at times, and he strains and gets cacophonous in a few spots. But it is the sound of an old school artist, an old soul artist, making a powerful personal statement of independence. I suppose its inherent emotional filament is why the album became a surprise cult hit among a weird constituency of rock snobs like us and TikTok kids, after Partisan Records released it in the deadest part of the yearly release calendar in mid-December. Seriously, Winter's label head, his manager, and even his own father thought the album would bomb. But alas, it didn't. Heavy Metal is an album that strikes a nerve, and one that, along with Geese's 2025 masterpiece Getting Killed, promises to launch Cameron Winter towards generational talent status very soon. Art, what's your thought?
Yeah, I think this is a good album of good songs that really needs his band. These songs really need his band, especially after hearing the album that really broke Geese last year, Getting Killed, and such a great album that was. I think these songs need I'm usually the kind of guy who likes stripped down stuff, but I think this album needs to be stripped up a little bit. And I think he needs his band on I think they would have made these songs sound better, would have made these songs come alive even more. At points, his album kind of sounds like a demo tape, really. It's like a very well-produced demo. And there's some good stuff. It's some really great songs here. But I think they need his band. And I don't think Cameron Winter's at the point yet in his development as an artist or as a singer-songwriter where he can pull off the solo singer-songwriter mode just yet. I think he sounds more confident when he has his band behind him, like he did on those two previous Geese records, especially the last one, Getting Killed. So that's my take on this album. I'm not as big on his vocal affectations as you are. One of the things I love about Getting Killed is that he tones down the shtick and he plays it more straight on Getting Killed. And as a result,
I agree with that.
He sounds more soulful and he sounds more authentic on Getting Killed. And that's what puts it over.
Well, that's the main thing that keeps it from being a truly great album is I think he's screwing around a little too much with like, let's try this in falsetto or let's try.
Right, exactly. And playing it straight and being more authentic and soulful is what really brings the lyrics home. As it does on Getting Killed.
Although he does have his moments, like his performance on Nausicaa is really, really great. The vocal performance on Cancer of the Skull was awesome.
He does have his moments on this for sure.
And I actually love the album closer, Can't Keep Anything, which is the closest thing to a Dylan song that he pulls off. Because, the lyric about this contemplation of the afterlife and ends up being a great diss song. It's like, you can't come with me to heaven, which is kind of funny. But
like I was saying, I think this is a good album of good songs that really needs a band, and specifically, they need his band. I think they would really spruce this up and make this a very, very good album instead of a pretty interesting good record. This could be a great album, and had of course re-record his vocals and not do the shtick and just do it straight. Another thing about Winter, if you his influences. I mean, especially with Getting Killed, I hear the influence of Radiohead's In Rainbows period, but for the most part, all his influences are 1960s and 70s. It's like the 1980s, 90s, and noughties never happened for him.
No question. I mean, Mick Jagger, Van Morrison, the guys I mentioned, Leonard Cohen, and Tom Waits is about as late as it gets.
Yeah, Tom Waits started in the 70s.
On this album again, Carole King is definitely a touch point for this album. Like I said, so his influences are really weird. People keep mentioning In Rainbows, by the way, and the only thing I can think of is that, he sounds like Tom York on Trinidad, and you're talking about like weird, original, great albums. And we haven't really had a weird, great original album since In Rainbows. And so I
can think of a few since 2007 that have been weird, great, and original, but that's another discussion.
Yeah, that certainly is another discussion. For what it's worth, Getting Killed is the best rock album since Sound of Silver in 2008. And I'll die on that hill.
Sound of Silver came out in 2007.
Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose, or maybe like a firehouse if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, Help us expand our little community and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock.
So, when you think about why grunge manifested in Seattle, of all cities, you have to think about three factors: location, weather, and generational disillusionment. Now we think of Seattle as a major city of international repute and an essential stop on any musician's or band's touring itinerary. But that only started in the 1990s, not just after the grunge explosion, but after the wild success of Starbucks and after the wild success of
Amazon.
Starbucks, Microsoft, and Amazon made Seattle and Washington State in general, quote unquote, hip and cool. In the 1960s and 70s, and even into the 80s, many bands and touring artists would bypass the Pacific Northwest region in general because of logistics. It was far from Los Angeles, just out of reach from San Francisco, and really out of the way from regular touring destinations like Phoenix, Denver, and all those cities in Texas. Alice in Chains lead singer Lane Staley once talked about being a 6-year-old kid going to an Elton John concert at the Seattle Center Coliseum in 1973. And Led Zeppelin once played a legendary 3.5-hour show at Seattle's Kingdome Stadium in 1977, which you can find in its entirety on YouTube, by the way. But those were more outliers than the rule. Not being able to see most big-name bands in their town, Seattle music lovers and aspiring musicians had to create and really focus on their own scene. By doing so, this naturally led to a more open-minded mentality toward music that didn't really care for boundaries and strict rules. The hardcore punk boom of the early 1980s that lit up the American indie underground definitely had an impact on Seattle, but it wasn't so much of one that it allowed or even forced an establishment of rules or a following of orthodoxy. In the late 1980s, in the 1980s in general, it was generally accepted that punk and heavy metal were widely different subgenres with completely different fan bases, different attitudes, different clothing styles, different record collections, different everything. And there was even a bit of animosity between the punk and metal camps in any given town. This wasn't quite the case in Seattle, where it was totally acceptable for the Stooges and Black Sabbath to share the same space in one's own record collection. In Seattle, fans of Motorhead were just as likely to be fans of The Clash. Led Zeppelin and Aerosmith were just as cool as The Cure and the Sex Pistols. The Rolling Stones were just as iconic as the Ramones. This attitude was especially prevalent among the aspiring musicians and artists in Seattle's music scene. After all, what was grunge if not an amalgam of punk rock, heavy metal, and classic 1960s and 70s rock and even blues rock? What is grunge if not that amalgam without generous infusions of mid-1960s garage rock, late 1970s post-punk, and early 1980s hardcore punk? The second factor, weather, is a peculiar one, but it makes sense when you think about it. Personally, I've never been to Seattle, but from everything I've read and from people I've talked to who either lived there or visited there, all say the same thing. It's cold, rainy, and damp, and it's like that most of the year.
Hey, it's Syracuse.
It's like Syracuse, right? Yeah, where we went to college.
It's the West Coast version of Syracuse.
But they don't get as much snow as Syracuse, though. Anyway, wearing flannel shirts and long john pants may have become fashionable in the wake of grunge's explosion in popularity, but for the people of the Pacific Northwest, it was a necessity due to the cold. One can imagine that Seattle isn't exactly the kind of town where outdoor activities are popular. If you were a young lover of rock music growing up in the 1970s or 80s, it's easy to imagine long days and nights staying indoors, drinking beer, smoking pot, and just listening to music endlessly. What was there to do productively other than pick up a guitar and work at it? The sound of grunge is dark, heavy, ominous, sludgy, sometimes even corrosive. This sound reflects the dark, cold, rainy, spooky ambiance that the weather in Seattle produces. It's a fitting and poetic synergy, just like the sunny and beautiful beach weather in Southern California inspired so much of the sunshine pop and laid-back folk and country rock that came from there. Logistic isolation inspiring and encouraging a boundary-free music scene is one thing, and the symbolism of environment influencing a music scene-specific sound is another. But when you combine all that with a new generation of music fans, Generation X that is at the time, coming of age that is disillusioned, disaffected, and resentful of the socio-cultural conservatism that was one of the hallmarks of Ronald Reagan's 1980s,
Yep.
you get something combustible. People in Seattle watched MTV and listened to the radio just like the rest of the country did. But because of that aforementioned geographical isolation and general outsider complex that the entire Pacific Northwest had at the time, it isn't surprising that this new generation of music fans and musicians coming up in the 1980s just didn't identify with most of the vapid, artificial pop metal that they were being force-fed. All in all, and with the benefit of hindsight and research, it makes perfect sense that this mixture of factors resulted in not just a riveting and unique music scene producing its own sound, but it resulted in a musical movement that would take over the rock music landscape by sheer virtue of its originality, its power, and its defiance of not just what the music industry demanded, but what American society at the time stood for. Grunge was the breath of fresh air, the kick in the ass that rock needed. And like I said in this episode's earlier parameter setter, it was rock music's last great countercultural revolutionary movement, one that equaled in commercial and artistic importance the hollowed music of the 1960s and the punk movement of the 1970s. Chris?
Yeah, that was a really good analysis. For me, it boils down to this. You have a bunch of weird, smart, charismatic dudes and a few women, Dead Moon and the Fastbacks and a few female groups up there. But they're like you said, they're stuck indoors and they love all kinds of hard rock, metal, punk music. And they had this bold notion that they could play all of it at once. And and that's really where grunge comes from. Because you think about it, in the early to mid 80s, you've got the British stuff. You got the Iron Maiden and the Judas Priest kind of thing going on in metal. And you've got like Black Flag and X that are punking their way out of LA. You've got Husker Du that's basically inventing what we know as punk pop there. And so those are undeniable influences that are happening 83, 84, 85. And you still you have that love for Black Flag, you have that love for Kiss. There's an evident love of Rush, very underrated influence on a lot of these grunge guys. And just and you have other bands that are kind of circulating out there in the early 80s. You've got the Vaselines, you've got the Meat Puppets and all of this. And so basically grunge is this smart aleck but well-intended attempt to play all of that at the same time. And they pretty much pulled it off, and that's what fascinates me. It's just this intellectual, hard rock and roll made by these guys that are pretty much stranded on an island, as you said. Like Seattle had Hendrix and Hart, and that was about it. As far as native sons and daughters.
Hey, what about Queensryche?
Okay, Queensryche. Okay. But Queensryche was coming up about the same time. It's kind of funny that Queensryche was doing their shtick the same time that grunge was happening, and they didn't have any crossover. It's very, that is kind of an anomaly. But yeah, just fascinating how it all came together and how it all developed. And we'll be talking a little bit too. Also, at the same time, you've got what we're calling grunge-adjacency, but that starts to trickle in to the influences as we go along. Not necessarily on this first group of records that we're going to talk about between 85 and 87, but you've got Sonic Youth that's infusing noise, that are making noise art. You've got the Pixies that are going to start experimenting with soft, loud dynamics. You've got Dinosaur Jr. that's experimenting with mixing sludge with lead guitar virtuosity and those types of things, and that all starts to trickle in the Seattle formula as well. It's essentially following the same dynamic, which is you're incorporating everything you love and doing it all at once, and so there's an evolutionary curve to that. So really, really, really fascinating to really study and explore.
Yeah. All right. Key records of this 1985, 86, 87 period that is really the gestation, the birth of the grunge movement and grunge adjacency, as you said. The first one we'll talk about, Green River with their EP Come On Down from 1985. The annals of rock history will always view Green River as an important footnote band, the one that, after their breakup in late 1987, saw lead singer Mark Arm and lead guitarist Steve Turner splinter off to form Mudhoney. Well, Steve Turner was briefly in Green River, left, and then reunited with Mark Arm to form Mudhoney, I should say. While rhythm guitarist Stone Gossard and bassist Jeff Ament splintered off to form Mother Love Bone, which eventually morphed into the legendary Pearl Jam. But these annals should have a certain amount of subtext with them, because Green River were one of a trio of bands, alongside the Melvins and Soundgarden, formed in the 1983 to 84 period, that formed the foundation of grunge and defined its sound. This EP is, for all intents and purposes, the first true grunge record, before the style even had a name. Several styles and subgenres would go into the formula of grunge, as I mentioned earlier, but Green River showcased the three most prevalent and obvious ones: raunchy punk rock, sweaty heavy metal, and epic, muscular classic rock of the 1970s vein. If the Stooges, Black Sabbath, and Aerosmith were put into a blender, this is indeed what would come out. For modern ears, this isn't anything special. But back in the mid-1980s, even on an underground indie level, there was nothing like this. During this time, American punk rock and the underground scene in general was still just starting to shake off the cobwebs of post-punk and hardcore. Green River certainly had the anti-establishment and, via mercurial lead singer Mark Arm, confrontational attitude and urgency of hardcore. But what made their sound so potent is that they mixed that obvious veneer with the musicianship and the accessibility of rock's classic era. We'll get into the other members of grunge's charter trio soon enough, but Green River put out their first statement well before them, and for that, they deserve their flowers. Chris?
Yes, they do. Very good band. Not nearly as good as the bands that came after from the members. Basically, this album is fascinating because this is the sound of what happens when you put the Mudhoney guys together with the Pearl Jam guys and have them coexist in the same band. Yeah. So at this time, the original lineup of Green River, 4 of the 5 guys, you had Mark Arm and Steve Turner of Mudhoney, and then you had Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament of Pearl Jam.
And before that, Mother Love Bone. Don't forget that.
Yeah, when there was Mother Love Bone, in between. Yeah, that was kind of the transitional band for Gossard and Ament. But so the idea that, Steve Turner and Mark Arm were punk guys. And Steve Turner's an awesome lead guitar player, one of the better lead guitar players that came out of Seattle, I think. But he's a punk guy. Yeah. And, he actually left the band before the release of this album. He recorded with it, the EP, but he left the band because he couldn't stand the metal leanings and and also the ambition of Gossard and Ament. Those guys wanted to be weird and swing for the fences, where he just wanted to just punk out. Right. And so you get this tension in this album. And it's a weird listen in some ways, because a lot of the songs, like Come On Down, the first song, it sounds as if Steve Turner and Mark Arm really want to be performing on a faster song. Right. And remember, Gossard and Ament wrote this song. Yeah. And so they're in kind of Gossard and Ament's domain, but they're acting like they really want to be playing in a faster song, and Ament and Gossard sound like they're pushing back. There's this fascinating tension in Come On Down, the song, where they accidentally find the sweet spot between punk and metal. And it's by total accident because of conflicts within the band. So So there's really, really great, Come On Down is a great song. And then the best song on the album, which actually it goes the other way around. Steve Turner wrote the music to Swallow My Pride. Mark Arm wrote all the lyrics, but Swallow My Pride is hilarious. It's basically Mark Arm lamenting the fact that he's dating a Reagan groupie. A flag waving Reagan groupie and trying to date her. So that's where the Swallow My Pride part comes from. So this is Turner speeding things up a little bit and really wanking out on the guitar, and Ament and Gossard just kind of filling in the rhythm, and it's almost like they have to hold back, or it's like, okay, now we're working for Turner. So again, it's this weird record, and the thing about it is Turner and Ament were buddies, but pretty much couldn't coexist in the same band.
Right. They had different tastes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and that's the thing, Ament is on record as saying he didn't like Turner's previous bands, but I'll join yours because what the heck, you need me, so I'll come on board. So it's just very strange story. But what you end up with is like some really, really cool stuff. And yeah, it is essentially the first grunge volley and the first true blueprint that was put out there publicly.
Right. All right. Next, the Deep Six compilation from 1986. Sub Pop Records is the indie label that is forever known as the one that kickstarted the grunge movement. And they certainly did that on an individual band basis. But it was another Seattle-based indie, CZ Records, that struck first with a compilation album that featured not just the original three of Seattle's grunge scene, Green River, Soundgarden, the Melvins, but a few other bands one could say were grunge-adjacent. By the way, we're going to use that word quite a bit throughout this episode and this series. As far as the original three, it's fascinating to hear these bands in more or less their embryonic form, just starting to spread their wings. Green River already had an EP out, but the Melvins and Soundgarden were still unsigned. Two of three Soundgarden songs on this compilation, Tears to Forget and All Your Lies, would show up re-recorded in better versions on ensuing releases, but you can already hear their volcanic, mesmerizing sound on Deep Six. As for the other three grunge-adjacent bands, one of them, Malfunction, we'll talk about very soon. The U-Men, represented with just one song, are the veterans here, dating back to 1980. They were the first Seattle band of the post-punk era to gain any kind of notoriety. Their brand of post-punk was a sleazy, dirty one, replete with an oddball sense of humor that marked them as a predecessor of the grunge sound. Skin Yard, represented with two songs, were the slightly grungified progressive rock band of the Seattle scene. That is to say, impressive musicianship, but not much in the way of impressive songs. They are notable, though, for guitarist Jack Endino, who would go on to be the producer of choice for many well-known Seattle bands when they were making their early indie label records, most notably Soundgarden, Mudhoney, and Nirvana. It's a fascinating, if uneven, snapshot of the time when grunge was starting to bloom. Chris?
Yeah, and you need to mention that Matt Cameron was the drummer for Skin Yard.
Yeah, that's right. He would go on to Soundgarden. Yeah,
yeah, and he plays drums on the Soundgarden songs too. So he's all over this compilation. So pretty fat. Yeah, like I said, it is a fascinating thing that this is what you call accidental anthropology. There was a lot of accidental in early grunge. So this album was a business card. This was CZ putting together this compilation to give these bands an outlet, one, to put their earliest stuff out. I mean, these are basically all demos. There's nothing non-demo in this entire thing. And to just give them a platform to kind of sell themselves, to get gigs, not just in Washington State, but in the larger area, maybe California, maybe elsewhere in the nation. And so it really was kind of a business card thing. But I call it accidental anthropology because it seems like, maybe unwittingly, but maybe wittingly, that these bands were all in a competition to determine who could do that splicing of punk and proto-metal and prog rock the best. Like who could outgrunge one another.
Yeah.
And so you get different shades of kind of the same phenomenon. The Malfunction stuff here is fascinating. We'll talk about Malfunction in a bit. because they spelled malfunction with funk in it, and it was pretty clear that that Funkadelic was an influence on Andrew Wood.
Sure.
And then that UMen song, it's a hybrid of psychobilly and prog rock. It's fascinatingly strange, weird but fun song. And so it's an interesting compilation. The Melvins stuff is just kind of just swamp shit, from the retresses of Buzz Osborne's mind. And so, yeah. And here's something to note, folks. If you want to find Deep Six, you got to go YouTube. Spotify's got a few assembled playlists that not all the songs. It's a 14-song comp. Not all the songs are available. And that's probably the same. It's probably not available on Apple Music either. You have to go to YouTube. A couple of heroes out there have put together playlists on YouTube to comp. It's worth checking out. It really is. It's kind of like what Peter Goralnik and those folks would do for like roots music.
Yeah.
The CZ guys did for early ass grunge.
Right. All right. Next, Malfunction, spelled MALFUNKSHUN, with Return to Olympus, a compilation recorded between 1986 and 87. After the Mondo success of Pearl Jam in the early 1990s, guitarist Stone Gossard took some of that Mondo money and created his own record label, Loose Groove Records. In 1995, the label released a compilation album called Return to Olympus, which compiled all the demos and unreleased recordings Malfunction made, all produced by Jack Endino, by the way, in a 2-year period spanning 86 to 87. It's a good thing this record was made because in the band's 8-year existence, spanning 1980 to 88, they never, or 87 really, they never officially released any music other than the 2 demo songs on the Deep Six compilation.
Yep.
Now, who were Malfunction? They were essentially grunge Kiss, or a dirtier, slimier, punkier Kiss. In any case, they did the makeup and the outfits, and they were very campy. But their campiness was offset by a very Gen X tongue-in-cheek humor and ironic detachment that let the audience know that they were in on the joke as well. And in lead singer, main songwriter, and bassist Andy Wood, they had a wildly charismatic frontman who worked up a stage presentation combining all the excessive, flamboyant rock star affectations of Mick Jagger, Alice Cooper, and Paul Stanley into an exaggerated, hilarious, yet irresistible package that one couldn't take their eyes off of. He would go on to a little bit of greater fame, some would say on the verge of superstardom, had he not died of a drug overdose, as the lead singer of Mother Love Bone, a band we'll talk about in the next episode of this series. But for my money, Malfunction was the purest, most direct distillation of Wood's vision. Chris?
Yeah, Andrew Wood was amazing. He was soul brother number 1 in the in the Seattle scene. His influences, Kiss and that kind of glam rock was obviously an influence, but funk, like we said, Funkadelic was an influence. He's a guy that I think unironically covered Ted Nugent's Wang Dang Poontang. Yeah, that's like a celebration of dumb rock. Yeah. And the amazing thing is, none of this except 2 songs saw the light of day. Yeah. And there's a part of me that wonders if like Perry Farrell and Timothy Avery caught wind of Malfunction, because there is some very, very Janes sounding stuff here on this record. And it almost makes me wonder if somehow Andrew Wood was an influence on these guys, or like they were aware of them. And, Wood would...
Or vice versa.
I don't know. Well, Janes, these guys are operating 80 to 87. Janes is, they're playing around in LA, but they don't see the light of day until 87 was the live album. 88 was nothing shocking. Yeah. So maybe they knew of each other and were influencing each other. So there's that. And so, like I said, they're a band, they were, influenced by as much by Super Stupid as they were Children of the Grave. So that made them unique. And I will say this, Wood, from what we know, Cornell and Wood were rooming together when Wood died. Yeah. This was before Cornell got married to Susan Stone. And
Susan Silver.
Susan Silver. Okay. Yeah. Whoops. Okay, I misspoke. Susan Silver. So I think Wood is an obvious influence on Cornell as a vocalist. He's an obvious influence on Jeff Ament as a bassist, because you can hear the germ of the bass style that Ament eventually adopted with not just Mother Love Bone, but with Pearl Jam. Yeah. And he was an obvious influence on Stone Gossard as a songwriter.
Yeah.
Because, his Gossard's songwriting got more showy and more confident and more poppy as he went along. So just a lot of great songs like Jezebel Woman, I Want to Be Your Daddy, Until the Ocean, definitely precursors to Mother Love Bone. So again, Andrew Wood is just essential, not just as a performer, but as a musician to kind of define the grunge that came after. So I love this album. And
yeah, it's really good.
and Andrew Wood was fantastic.
Yeah, grunge kiss, man. Can't beat it. All right, next. The Melvins with Gloomy Porch Treatments from 1987, their first full-length album. One of the original three bands that laid the foundations for grunge, the Melvins were the most metal of any band that came out of Seattle. Not only is this one of the landmark albums of the grunge movement, it's also a landmark stoner metal album. It's also a landmark doom metal album. No matter how you shake it, the Melvins were heavier and sludgier than Satan's balls. Not God's balls, mind you. That's another band that we're going to cover in the next episode of this series. Yeah. What made this band unique, though, was that their brand of grungy metal, or metallicized grunge, however you want to call it, had the urgency and conciseness of hardcore punk. Most of the songs on this album don't go past the 3-minute mark. Actually, half of them are 2 minutes or under. And singer-guitarist Buzz Osborne has always claimed that as a teenager, he was way more into Black Flag than Black Sabbath. The Melvins would go on to have an extremely prolific and rather eclectic discography, and they're still active today. But Gloomy Porch Treatments, to me, represents the initial blast-off of a fully formed band with a powerfully groundbreaking sound. Chris?
Yeah, the album is one long song. It's slow, pounding, heavy, just Buzz just banging the shit out of everything. Basically, this album is the sound of Buzz Osborne telling late period Black Flag to hold his beer. Kind of taking what they started and taking it to its extreme. Like I said, if clobbering time was a rhythm, it basically that's what defines this. And yeah, like you said, this is really, like Master of Reality kind of hinted at what could be stoner metal. The Melvins kind of basically invented it with this. Without the Melvins, you don't really get Caius, know, and you don't get a lot of other bands. Like Nirvana was heavily influenced by the Melvins too. Yeah. And the thing about these early grunge bands is that they were all friends, and there was kind of an incestuous thing. Like half of these people were in each other's bands at one point or another. Right. And so here we end up with a cover of a great Green River song from what was released they released a compilation of 1984 demos after everybody got big. But there's a song on that called Leech. Yeah. And in Green River's hands, it's a little bit faster, it's punkier, and it's gnarlier. And of course, Buzz takes that and Melvins take that, and they slow it down, they stretch it out, and they find the bottom. And it's really interesting to hear the Melvins do their take on Green River. So worth it just for that. And like you said, they went on to kind of a weird eclectic career. Never they had their moment in the sun thanks to Cobain in the early 90s, but then they faded back into a happy obscurity.
Yeah, well, they were so uncommercial. This is not a band that would ever get on the radio.
Yeah, I was going to say they were never going to come up with their 3-minute pop hit. Buzz Osborne had no interest in catching the pop lightning in a bottle. He was just going to do his thing.
Right. And then Soundgarden with the Screaming Life EP from 1987, their first official release. Comparisons to Led Zeppelin have always dogged Soundgarden throughout their career, especially with singer Chris Cornell's paint-peeling wails being compared to those of a young Robert Plant. But those comparisons are always at least partly unfair. When Soundgarden got off the ground in 1984, they were a trio, Cornell on vocals and drums, Kim Thayil on guitar and Hiro Yamamoto on bass, whose sound was more ingrained in psychedelia and post-punk. When former Skin Yard drummer Matt Cameron joined Soundgarden in 1986, with Cornell moving to full-time lead singer, the band's sound solidified into that of a new original kind of hard rock. Oddly tuned or sometimes even down-tuned guitars would create dark, churning riffs that combined with odd rhythms and time signatures to create a unique atmospheric heaviness. Their debut EP, the first major release on what would go on to be Seattle's iconic Sub Pop Records, and yes, produced by Jack Endino, is simply one of the greatest EPs of all time. Soundgarden went on to become a hugely popular band and forever branded as one of Seattle grunge's big four bands, so it's easy to take them for granted. But listening to Screaming Life with fresh ears, it's startling to hear how innovative and how original and really how influential Soundgarden's music was, even at this very early stage in their career. Chris?
Yeah, Soundgarden, I disagree with you, by the way. I think Soundgarden was the most metal of the Seattle,
maybe traditional
Seattle bands.
The most traditionally metal, yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of trad metal, but I also saw a line about Soundgarden that somebody referred to at least their initial stuff as punk played backwards. It's instead of going up the fret, you're going down the fret.
Yeah,
and you're also down tuning, to kind of approximate the Black Sabbath thing. And so so kind of Thiel is like the pioneer. Really of this. And the fascinating thing about Screaming Life is at this point, this is Thiel's band. This is not Chris Cornell's band. This is Thiel's band.
It would become Cornell's band very soon, though.
Certainly by Bad Motorfinger, it was totally Cornell's band. But Thiel is writing 90% of the music. Yamamoto's got a couple of credits on this EP too. And then Cornell is literally, so he writes the lyrics. But he's literally trying to find his voice. So the music's not his. And at this point, he literally is trying to find his voice. He's very early Soundgarden. He's more screechy than he is. He hasn't found that richness in his voice, and he hasn't soared into the heavens. And so it's more of this sort of faded yelp or yelling at this point. And so it's interesting to hear this because this version of Soundgarden is Thiel's vision rather than Cornell's. And so listening to that, I mean, it makes me respect Thiel because as it became Cornell's band, Thiel, he went from focusing on the writing and the rhythm guitar to then becoming one hell of a lead guitar player. Like by the time you get to Louder Than Love, like his lead playing becomes absolutely essential to the Soundgarden song. Like so, then you get to like Bad Motorfinger where he just does crazy shit all over the album. Right. But here it's a little bit more. Not restrained, but it's a little bit more kind of, with the exception of the tunings, a little bit more conventional and more sort of, what you would think of as mainstream metalish. Another anthropological thing. This is like Soundgarden before they became like fucking Soundgarden. Yeah. But it's still really good. It's still really awesome. Like, Hand of God is interesting. The first couple of songs on it are both awesome as well. Right. So great stuff.
On this episode, we started our new 10-part series about the saga of grunge. For the next episode, we're going to celebrate Valentine's Day in our customary, twisted, warped, curmudgeonly way. Analyzing breakup albums. That's right, the overall arching theme of romantic breakups has been the overall arching theme for many of the greatest albums in music history, and we're going to count down the 15 best of those. Why 15? Well, Valentine's Day is on February 14th. 14 plus 1 for good luck keeping that relationship going, by the way, equals 14. Curmudgeonly logic. Join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report counts down the 15 greatest breakup albums of all time. Now, we will get into a series of bands that weren't really grunge, but they were grunge-adjacent in how they shared a sensibility with the grunge movement in their anti-mainstream stance, in how heavy and loud they were, in how they mined the influence of both punk and heavy metal, albeit in different ways, in their wise-ass ironic attitudes, and in the case of Dinosaur Jr., in those gargantuan badass guitar riffs. But first, let's go with the mighty Sonic Youth and their run of 3 albums during this period: Bad Moon Rising from 1985, Evil from 1986, and their first masterpiece, Sister, from 1987. Sonic Youth originated in the early 1980s as part of New York City's no-wave music scene. Basically, it was an extension of the city's punk and new wave movement of the 1970s, but it was a backlash against how commercial and watered down they viewed punk to have become. While many of the bands and artists in this scene were all about confrontational noise and atonal skronking, Sonic Youth were more artful than that. Yes, they worked with guitar feedback, dissonance, and atonality, but they created aural sculptures with them, creating oddly melodic and even beautiful figures. Their murky, spooky guitar soundscapes had a lot in common with the atmospheric heaviness of early grunge bands like Soundgarden and the Melvins. They also had more than a little bit of rock and roll in them, as evident by their relatively faithful cover of the Stooges' I Wanna Be Your Dog on their 1983 debut album, Confusion is Sex. It was with their 1985 album, Bad Moon Rising, though, that they perfected their early sound while incorporating heavy guitar riffage in tracks such as Death Valley 69. Then they got signed by SST Records, the legendary Long Beach, California-based independent record label founded by Black Flag guitarist Greg Ginn and home to Black Flag, Husker Du, the Minutemen, and the Meat Puppets. With the 1-2 punch of 1986's Evil and 1987's Sister, Sonic Youth introduced actual conventional songwriting into their sound, which managed to make their guitar freakouts and experimental noise ventures that more dramatic. These are the records that a young Kurt Cobain was listening to when he became enamored and deeply influenced by them. A couple of masterpieces would follow in the next few years that would solidify their standing as one of the greatest U.S. alternative bands of all time. But this mid-1980s period is a great spot for first-time listeners to jump on board and see what the fuss has always been about. Chris?
Yeah, this is what you call kind of an evolutionary period. This is like the pre-Big Bang period for Sonic Youth. Yeah. Otherwise known as, the stuff they did leading up to Daydream Nation from '88, which is one of the top 100 albums ever made. Bad Moon Rising, to me, is boring. It's intrinsically interesting, but it goes on for way too long. It's essentially, what the Bad Moon Rising album came out of, and what I've read about, is that their shows, what would happen is Thurston Moore and Lee Ronaldo, the guitarists, would have these periods during the show where, because of their emphasis on weird and exotic and like crazy tunings, it would take like 5 minutes for one of these guys to tune their guitar to where they wanted to go next. And what would happen is while they were doing the tuning and the squeaks and squonks that were coming out of that, the other one would start riffing and would start countering on that, and they would build these like back and forth bits. And so they took that concept. And this album, with the exception of the last song, Death Valley 69, is basically like one continuous performance, or is at least edited to sound like one continuous performance. But it's like 52 minutes of like this, whoa, yeah, and just this back and forth with like no discernible melody, and just this, and so it's like you're painting. It's like you're making Jackson Pollock paintings with electric guitars, and there's only so much of that that's tolerable. Who kind of agrees with me here is our favorite rock critic, Robert Christgau. This is his consumer guide take on Bad Moon Rising. Quote, "They're sure to disagree. What else are they good for? But despite all of their apocalyptic integrity and unmediated who's-he what's-its, the achievement of their first album, their first halfway decent record, is strictly formal, simple rhythmic songs that neither disappear beneath nor get the better of the clanging and grinding of their brutal late industrial guitars. Whatever credibility the guitars lend to their no doubt painful but nonetheless hackneyed manic depression is undermined by their usual sociopathic psychopathic fantasies. And in the end, the music isn't ugly or ominous or bombs bursting in midair. It's just interesting. B.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he gave it a B.
Like B minus, B. Yeah. Well, the albums before this, Chris Gow and Sonic Youth actually had a feud for a few years.
Yeah.
That Chris Gow panned the shit out of him and really offended Kim Gordon, and so it really they were not friends for a long time. Yeah, like then you get that, and then you get into Evil, where where they really start to get more melodic, and they start to get these structures, and they even get more distinct and more wild with their tunings, and you start to get some really great killer post-punk kind of stuff. Star Power, which is awesome. Death to Our Friends, which is awesomely twitchy and surfy and spooky. Like I said, surf rock was actually, I think, a pretty big influence on Thurston Moore. The Dick Dale and Link Ray kind of stuff. Thurston Moore, it was like him doing that, but with odd tunings. And then the album ends with, it was originally released as Expressway to Your Skull.
Yeah.
Then on a re-release was changed to Madonna, Sean, and Me, referencing Madonna and Sean Penn. And this is Moore's first foray into real melody. Before then, he was just droning. Now he's actually trying to sing. And so what you end up with awesomely gnarly noise rock, and it plays like a musical freight train. It's really, really great. And then you get into Sister, which is just banging. Catholic Block, first truly awesome song within this streak. Just driving and relentless, but tuneful with an oddly pretty coda. And this album just has a genuine intensity. You have stuff like Stereo Sanctity, Tough Gnarl, and Pacific Coast Highway, which is really great. And then it ends with White Cross, which is pretty much a grunge song.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of, like you said, they're kind of doing the same exercise of playing all the stuff they love, but coming at it from a different angle. Because they came out of that no wave scene in the early '80s in New York City. So different sensibility, but the same idea. And so it's really cool. And then it sets up again, even then, like they were getting there and they made this awesome album. But I'm sure the first time that even the people that loved Sister heard Teenage Riot, they were like, holy shit.
I mean, they were improving by leaps and bounds, but I think the big thing is that between 85 and 86, between Bad Moon Rising and Evil, they brought in Steve Shelley as the drummer. And that was the game changer for Sonic Youth. Once they got like a real fucking powerhouse drummer, like, you know what? Let's write some real fucking powerhouse songs.
Yeah.
There we go.
And it went, and it was like a snowball rolling downhill, and it just kept getting better and better, as they went along. So so Sonic Youth, definitely grunge adjacency. And then obviously, they ended up influencing grunge's glory period because, Cobain was hugely influenced by Sonic Youth and was friends with them. Remember, because they opened for Sonic Youth.
Right.
And actually it was Sonic Youth that kind of played a role in Nirvana getting signed to DGC, to Geffen's rock label. So, so there you go. So they have an important place in the history of grunge.
Right. Next, this band does as well. Dinosaur Jr. with You're Living All Over Me from 1987. Probably the most grunge-adjacent of all grunge-adjacent bands.
Yeah.
Dinosaur Jr. emerged from Amherst, Massachusetts in the mid-1980s and introduced something the American indie alternative scene hadn't heard yet or hadn't heard in a long time. The guitar solo. And I don't mean Eddie Van Halen style heavy metal shredding. I mean bluesy, soulful solos inspired by classic 1960s and 70s rock. That's what guitarist, singer-songwriter Jay Mascis brought onto the scene, and their second album, You're Living All Over Me, was a definitive statement of intent and became an instant classic when it came out, a status it still carries to this day. Dinosaur Jr. mixed punk rock volume and aggression, classic rock guitar soloing, and folk rock melodies and song structures to create a dense, overwhelming sound that was also anthemic and uplifting. Much of the sound of 1990s alternative rock, especially what was heard on the radio, owes a lot to what Dinosaur Jr. kickstarted with this album. Chris?
Yeah. Awesome album. Amazing album. And really on songs like Little Furry Things and Sludge Feast, You can practically hear dozens of bands being born. This is a list that clearly includes Smashing Pumpkins and Slater-Kinney, and maybe Built to Spill, and maybe a couple of late period grunge bands as well. But like dozens of bands came from Dinosaur Jr.'s wake. Jay Mascis, hugely influential guitarist, and that was the difference. He was making like sludgy music with like virtuosic lead guitar. And so that was kind of the innovation here. So it's this crunchiness with next to beauty, and that juxtaposition is just really, really great. And so the first 7 songs on this album are perfect, and they're so good that they make the 2 Lou Barlow piece of shit at the end forgivable. You know, I'm not a huge fan of the Lou Barlow stuff at the end. And then the CD pressing, by the way, of this record has a really fun cover, Just Like Heaven by The Cure. It's like Jay Mascis doing the Cure Dinosaur Jr. style. It's a lot of fun. And my dad was from Springfield, Massachusetts, and I worked right out of college in Springfield. Serendipity. So Amherst is a sleepy college town, but like Barlow and Mascis were from Amherst. They were just locals. So who knew that the 2 awesome rock guys were in, of all places, Amherst, and they weren't even UMass students.
Right.
So, go figure.
Next, the Pixies with Come On Pilgrim, their debut EP from 1987. Now, many younger generation listeners who love the Pixies will probably balk at the idea of them being a grunge-adjacent band, especially considering how influential and important they were to the development of what we now call indie rock. But when the Pixies came out in the late 1980s, they were a monster-sized influence on the soon-to-come second wave of grunge bands, especially Nirvana. Seriously, Smells Like Teen Spirit is a Pixies song in structure with a sped-up variation of the riff to Boston's More Than a Feeling. And Kurt Cobain himself iterated this in various interviews in his lifetime. The soft verses, loud chorus dynamic that Nirvana became famous for comes straight out of the Pixies playbook. What also marks the Pixies as grunge adjacent is how, in their own way, they married punk and metal. They sprinkled some of their songs, especially on this EP and on their full-length debut the following year, with the manic intensity of thrash metal. See Isla de Encanta. While the cathartic and visceral power of early punk rock is drenched all over their music, especially in this early period of the band. Finally, what also makes them grunge adjacent is in how, as I alluded to earlier, Black Francis, real name Charles Thompson, infuses lyrics with wise-ass irony and irreverent humor mixed in with surreal imagery. Actual grunge bands like Nirvana, Mudhoney, and 7 Year Bitch would go on to take this approach to the next level. In no way am I saying the Pixies were just a grunge-adjacent band. Their totally unique and groundbreaking sound, as well as their exquisitely written songs, marks them as one of the 5 most important bands in all of alternative and quote-unquote indie rock. But let's not forget that in their own way, they made their mark on grunge as well. Chris?
Yeah, Black Francis might as well have been the Andrew Wood of Boston. He had that kind of quirky showiness to him, and the wise-ass sense of humor and the irony and all of that. This is a really strong EP. Doesn't have as much of the soft, loud dynamics as they would do on the full lengths. It's a little bit more rocked out. It's a little and it's quirkier. Caribou is like really pretty and soulful. Actually, it's one of the better songs they ever did. Nimrod's Son is a real standout here as well. And again, like you said, huge influence on Cobain, and the soft loud thing, like the post-Nirvana, like wannabe grunge bands, Bush, all that, they all adopted this. Nirvana basically with In Utero more than Nevermind really made the soft loud dynamic a thing that people think of when they think of grunge, even though it was like really Nirvana and to a lesser extent Soundgarden doing it. Really important stuff, and we're acknowledging this EP as kind of starter kit Pixies, and they only grew from there.
Right. And now we end this episode with Green River, back to where we started with Rehab Doll. Came out in 1988, recorded in 1987. And we end this episode by going back to Seattle and to the one and only full-length studio album Green River ever made. By 87, the division that we talked about had grown in the band, with guitarist Stone Gossard and bassist Jeff Ahmet on one side and lead singer Mark Arm on the other. Gossard and Ahmet wanted to pursue a major label deal, while Arm wanted to remain on an indie label. More importantly, though, their tastes were already diverging. Gossard and Ahmet wanted to align themselves with a little closer to heavy metal, or at least a scuzzier, dirtier version of metal. Remember, Guns N' Roses was starting to become popular at this time. Arm, on the other hand, was a punk purist and wanted to remain on that side of the fence. The band decided to break up in October of 87, but they agreed to finish work on the album. By the time it came out in mid-1988, Arm had already gotten Mudhoney off the ground, and Gossard and Ahmet were off and running with Mother Love Bone. By listening to it, though, you wouldn't think this was a band breaking up. Compared to their 1985 debut EP, Come On Down, it's much better produced. The sound is crisper and the songs are sturdier and more muscular. The version of Swallow My Pride, one of their signature songs, is way better here.
Yeah.
Songs like Pork Fist and Smilin' and Dyin' and the bluesy, sludgy grind of Take a Dive are excellent reminders of why there was such a critics buzz surrounding this band at the time. Chris?
Yeah, this album, in a way, I think a lot of this is that Ahmet and Gossard and the other two guys besides Arm, they shared writing credits, but you can kind of tell that Gossard was kind of leading the charge. And it's kind of them throwing a bone to Arm on the way out the door, because it's faster, it's meatier, it's more muscular, and really it's punkier than the EP. You know, it's not nearly as grungy, you would say. It's not nearly as bottom heavy, but it's just some great rock and roll songs. Pork Fist is awesome. Take a Dive is awesome. And I like One More Stitch. That's like the most grunge thing on the record, where you get the acoustic riffs driving it, and it kind of winds through and it builds in intensity, and it's kind of like a grunge version of like Sergio Leone Western theme music. Right. It has that kind of the thing to it. And so it kind of presages Arm's vocal performances, kind of set up the table for what he would do in Mudhoney, and the kind of the riffage and agility that Gossard and Ament and Fairweather and all those guys showed obviously translates to Mother Love Bone and then Pearl Jam. And so it's an important kind of pivot record, and a great place to end this episode on this first seminal chapter of proto-grunge. And then proto-grunge became real grunge between 88 and 91.
Right. So
there you go, folks.
We are finished. Done with part one of the saga. We're done.
Yeah, absolutely. And this saga will be long. It will not be linear. We'll break it up over the course of the next year, maybe even year plus. But we're gonna explore this, and we're gonna go pretty deep into it. And like I said, we'll probably cover some of the lesser bands in here too. Like the Dead Moons and the Fastbacks and
7 Year Bitch, one of my personal favorites.
Yeah, 7 Year Bitch, and some of and what was the Young Fresh Fellows? Were kind of sort of grunge, and just bands like that. So we'll cover the minors, and we'll definitely dip into God's Balls in the next episode as well. The greatest album title of all time from Tad. And like I said, this speaks to the humor. Like I said, if you're bored and you can't go outside and you're hanging around drinking and smoking all day, you're going to come up with some really goofy shit. That's part of the charm. That's part of the charm of grunge, is that like half of it is really fucking goofy. Half of it is profound and half of it is fucking goofy. And that's the beauty of it. So there you go. And with that, as we always do at the end of these episodes, folks, we encourage you to join our curmudgeonly community on Facebook. Rollicking times are had up there, and good discussions and lots of enthusiasm from some of our frequent flyers up there. Art tends to post stuff that kind of wets your whistle for the upcoming episode. And so you can join us there at Curmudgeon Rock, or facebook.com/group/Curmudgeon Rock. It's invite only, but chances are we'll let you in. got anything to say? Did you not like this grunge period? Any thoughts about Green River's influence that we didn't cover? Send us fan mail, curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And then finally, as we always do, and we have for the last couple of years now, we'll have a Spotify playlist that you can access via the episode description, wherever you get your podcast, whether that's Apple or Stitcher or whatever. We'll have this, and I think I'll throw in Green River's version of Leech, just for comparison purposes, with the Melvins version of Leech. We'll have some fun with that. So be on the lookout for that. Hey, and always, folks, dig it.